Well, we're on day 12 of the 21-day national lockdown to curb the spread of COVID-19. Some ministers have been contradicting some of the rules and regulations set out. Human Rights Attorney Richard Spoor has criticised the ministers for this, and he joins me now. Good morning to you, Richard. I've been reading your tweets. You've been a busy man, and let's work through some of them. You say what you're seeing happening at the moment amounts to abuse of power. Why is that?
Yes. What we've seen is a conflation of regulations, directions and policy statements and speeches by ministers. And all of this is being put together in a mishmash that creates a lot of confusion and uncertainty, and unfortunately is also resulting in police taking actions based on what are, quite frankly, non-lawful instructions and directions, arresting people, detaining them, in instances assaulting them, and this is most undesirable. So we need to have some clarity about what the law is under this lockdown. And basically under the Disaster Management Act, the Minister of Cooperative Governance, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, is entitled to make regulations. And those are her regulations. She's the person who makes them, and nobody else has any extraordinary powers. What cabinet ministers do have is the power to give directions. And directions are not regulations. They are not lawful. They don't have the effect of law, and contravening them isn't a criminal act. And these directions are to direct the resources of government to be mobilized, moved around and act to support the regulations of the minister and to support the actions taken to close this down.
But Richard, can that be easily confused?
Very readily confused, particularly because some of the ministers get confused. So we have people like the Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalule, issuing directions and regulations and getting the two conflated. Worst of all, he issues regulations in his own right that contradict the regulations made by the Copter minister. So a good example is taxi regulations. The regulations promulgated by Minister Dlamini-Zuma are very clear: 50% of capacity. He unilaterally increased that to 100% and then reduced it down to 70%. He has no power and he's got no authority to do that. We've seen Minister Ebrahim Patel introducing regulations under the Competition Act that purport to regulate unreasonable price rises of scarce products. The Competition Act doesn't authorize him to take those kinds of measures. He's riding on the back of the lockdown regulations, and he's getting this mixed up with the Competition Act and his powers there, and he's passing laws that have consequences. For example, a butcher in Durban was arrested for allegedly inflating his meat prices excessively after the intervention of a local MEC. That's completely unlawful. Patel had no such power, but this trickles down. Police are given this information, politicians give this information, and they respond and react to it. And that's simply wrong.
And where does it leave us? I mean, Zapira did a great cartoon. You saw, bus load of people packed to the rafters, zooming past the police, giggling away, and then some lone man walking his dog getting arrested. Does that give some of the power back to the people if we see the politicians behaving like this? Because we can say, well, where's the rule that fits all?
Well, it's very unhelpful because it creates ambiguity, doubt and uncertainty. It also leads to precipitate action by policemen who are not properly instructed. It's not a good thing at all. I think it should be made very clear that Minister Dlamini-Zuma has got the power. She gives the regulations, she issues them, and they are binding. There are other issues, of course. One of the big issues is about what are basic goods. So the Act regulates what are essential services and essential goods, and amongst those goods are basic goods, and that is defined as including electricity and airtime, but it could also include airbrushes, it could also include cigarettes. Now, who decides which is which? Well, there is no regulatory clarity on this issue. So whatever you think are basic goods are basically basic goods. And if there's an argument about it, well, it'll go to court. But it doesn't help that Bheki Cele makes an announcement that cigarettes are not basic goods. Bheki Cele is not in a position to give such instructions and directions. They're not his regulations. But people are being arrested, people are being closed down because of this.
And Richard, I'm just wondering what you make about the allegations of corruption when it comes to tenders, a massive IT tender that has been passed for 30 million rand. I mean, is this another sort of black hole that we need to investigate behind the COVID-19?
Well, I note that the excuse given for deviating from the directions and the tender processes is this COVID emergency. Yeah. So yes, there's plenty of scope to use this emergency to pursue your own agendas, whatever they are, corrupt ones, health initiatives, stop smoking, stop drinking and the like. There is massive scope for abuse for irrelevant considerations to be brought into the picture, and this emergency be used to drive and pursue those other agendas. Clarity is really important. Certainty is important, and government needs to make sure it happens.
Including amassing power.
Yeah, well, the regulations are very clear. They lapse after 30 days or at some earlier stage. So these powers will disappear automatically. I do mention, though, that some of the regulations passed by the other ministers in terms of their own legislation that they don't have that limitation. So there's a possibility that some of these rules and regulations passed by other ministers will not lapse and will continue. And we'll have to take a very careful look at what those are and see what kind of steps need to be taken to shut down the abuse of these exceptional powers.